Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first one is titled, "You want us to unload our lumber around you? Better get ready to sit tight for a while." So this happened earlier today and was too perfect to not share with you guys. I work in construction as the foreman for a new house build. The location is kinda strange. The house is 250 feet up a hill via a footpath only. All of our materials have to come up this footpath by hand. It's a pain in the butt to manually carry, quite literally, an entire house up this hill. One of our saving graces is having the 2 parking spots on the street at the bottom of this hill marked with official no parking signs. Unfortunately, there is an elementary school about half a block away, and the parents of children seem to regularly, at least twice a day, think it's okay to park in our spots. Now I consider myself a reasonable person, so if someone is parked in the spots and we don't have a delivery or a need to park a truck, I will let it go. If we need the spots and there's someone parked there, however, I will ask them to move nicely, and most of the time they do so immediately. Until today. I get a phone call from the lumber delivery truck that is en route to our location. He says he'll be there in about 2 or 3 minutes. I let him know I will meet him at the street and make sure he has space to park. He's carrying all of the material to frame the roof of our house, which is a lot of really big lumber and will take easily an hour to bring up the hill, so naturally I didn't want him parked in the middle of the street with his hazards on for an hour, when we have a perfectly good parking spot for him. As I begin my trip down the hill, I notice there is a school parent sitting in her car idling, assuming she's just waiting to pick up her child. I walk up to her car and politely let her know that she is parked in a no parking zone and we really need her to clear it to park a delivery truck. She scoffs at me and rudely states back, "I'll just be a few minutes, and your truck isn't here, take a chill pill, dude." Before I can respond, a giant lumber truck comes around the corner and I wave to him and then gesture towards him to the woman in the car, who has now put her window back up to ignore me. I put on my best customer service smile and wave at her through the window. She put it down halfway and angrily shouts, "What?" By now the truck has pulled up alongside her car and I politely ask her again, with a stronger tone of voice, to move her vehicle, reminding her that she is illegally parked in a tow-away zone. Then she gives me this wonderful idea. She says, "Can't you guys just unload around me? Jesus, it's not that hard." I give her another smile and walk away, a brilliant plan forming in my head. I instruct the delivery driver to park as close to her as possible and block her in with the porta potty that is at one end of our reserved spots and the parked car that is parked just adjacent to our spots on the other end. He smiles because he immediately gets what I'm trying to do, and proceeds to expertly block this lady and her car into a little 2 parking spot jail. We unstrap the lumber and my guys begin humping material up the hill. Meanwhile, I call the police parking enforcement to let them know the situation. At this point in time, I wasn't trying to get her in trouble, I just wanted a record of why we were blocking part of the street so we don't get in trouble with the city. The very friendly traffic officer lets me know that she can be there in about 30 minutes and deal with the situation for me. Wonderful. As we continue to unload lumber, the child of the parent shows up, and wouldn't you know it, Mum is just now realizing that the lumber truck is parked so close she can't get out of her driver door to meet her kid. She awkwardly clambers across the inside of her car and stumbles out the passenger door, shooting glaring looks at me and the truck driver in the process. She loads her kid into the back and then begins to realize that she has no way of leaving. She comes storming up to myself and the driver and states, "I'm in a big hurry, you need to move your damn truck right now so I can go." Before I can respond, the driver gets a grin on his face and says, "Ma'am, in order to unload the lumber on the truck we had to unstrap it, and per our company policy I'm not allowed to move the truck with any unsecured load on it. Sorry." This sends her into near aneurysm levels of blood pressure. Meanwhile, I can barely contain my laughter. "Duck your policy, I have somewhere to be." She barks back at him. At this point, with impeccably convenient timing, the parking enforcement officer shows up and parks behind the truck. The angry lady doesn't see the officer arrive, and while the officer is still getting out of her vehicle, I just casually say, "Can't you just pull out around it? It's not that hard." With the biggest grin I've ever had, I watch as she realizes that I just used her line on her. "Duck you." She yells, and storms back to her car and angrily clambers back in through the passenger door and into the driver's seat. At this point the officer is walking up to myself and the driver. Before she can even introduce herself, the mum in the car slams it into reverse and stomps on the gas, crashing into our porta potty and knocking it over, and then throws the car into drive and tries to mount the curb and drive on the sidewalk. The officer, driver and I are staring in disbelief as she gets halfway over the curb and gets stuck. I can hear her screaming obscenities over the idling truck from inside her car. The officer promptly walks up to the door of the car and orders her out. My favorite part of the entire thing is watching her face go to shock as she realized she just did all of that in front of a police officer. She gets slapped in cuffs as the parking officer calls for a second unit and she is promptly sat on the very curb she tried to drive over. She sits on the curb yelling to the now two officers about how we told her she could stay there and that we never asked her to move. The traffic officer responds that she was the one who was originally called when the mum first refused to move and that she already knows what's going on. While the driver and I are giving a report to the second officer, my guys finish moving the remainder of the lumber and the driver finishes his statement and takes off to go back to the yard. By the end of the ordeal, the mum was arrested, charged with child endangerment. Her kid was in the back of the car the whole time, reckless driving, destruction of property, the porta potty, and driving on a suspended license. On top of all that, she also got her car towed. The kid went home with his grandma and she went to spend some quality time in a cell. I never expected her to actually heed my advice to just pull out around it. But I think next time she'll probably think twice about parking in a tow-away zone if she ever gets a license again. The next one is titled, "Charge Me a Cancellation Fee for Someone Else's Mistake?" Take this IRS. First, you have to appreciate the kind of guy Nathan is. Brilliant engineer, crazy person. Nathan likes rules and Nathan doesn't give up when he knows how things should work. I like to get him to tell the story whenever we're together because he doesn't even see why it's funny, it's just how he deals with all problems. Nathan was like if you saw Sisyphus and you thought, maybe I should try to stop him. But then one day, the boulder was on top of the hill. And you go and ask Sisyphus how he did it and he replied, it was simple. I just kept pushing it forever and ever, and eventually, the mountain gave up. A real grade 19 bureaucrat. He just works systems through problems no matter how daunting they should seem. Until one day, when Nathan's unstoppable force met an immovable object. I came into work and saw checks and envelopes spread all over his desk. And Nathan filling them out with the kind of grin Steve Buscemi might have crossing names off a list with a tube of lipstick. I ask him about it and he calmly starts explaining that he's having trouble with the IRS. I probe a little deeper since that in no way explains more than one check or envelope, and he starts telling me about how last year during tax season he was in China for work, so he started filling his taxes out early while at his parents' house. He owed a little but left before he could mail it in. But he remembered while in China and broke through the firewall in order to paid it online. But then his parents, thinking he forget, wrote a check for him and mailed his taxes in too. So now his taxes would be paid twice. So they said don't worry about it, we'll cancel the check. Well, it turns out that NYSIRS has a cancelled check fee of something like $40. And they sent Nathan a bill and penalty for the $40. That was it. That was the whole story. A $40 fee. Nathan, why do you have 20 checks on your desk? Oh, well, after I explained to them what was wrong with the fee, they didn't get it. So Nathan spent the next 4 weeks escalating the issue to the point that he got a case officer, a real, live human agent on the phone with a case number. Nathan started by asking for the agent to spell his name, and politely to demonstrate that he was where he said he was by asking how the weather was and how the drive-in had been that day. He then asked for his agent's manager, got their name and exchanged some pleasantries. He explained that his parents wrote the check but that he was the one being charged the fee. The agent explained that this was the policy of the IRS, all cancelled checks will result in a $40 fee. The agent and Nathan went in rigorous compliance circles for hours exploring the rules. Nathan then calmly confirmed that it is the policy of the IRS to allow just anyone to write a check on behalf of anyone else. Yes, sir, that is fine. You just need to indicate the name and zip code of the account. It is the policy of the IRS to charge a $40 cancellation fee to the person whose account is indicated on the check? Yes, sir, that is the policy in NYS. This means that, and I swear to God he actually asked the agent this hypothetical question on the phone, I, Nathan, could write a $10 check and indicate it's for you, Mr. Agent, at 1,234,567 Schenectady, NY, and cancel it, resulting in a $40 fee for you with absolutely no penalty or recourse to me? The equally compliant and rule-minded agent replied, yes sir, I guess you could. So, that's what Nathan did. And that's what was doing with 20 checks on his desk and what he meant by IRS trouble. He was following through, sending checks to the IRS address to pay the taxes of the agent and the agent's manager, so Nathan could cancel them, causing the agent and his manager to owe the IRS a fee for each cancelled check. He was exploiting the same flaw in the system in which he was caught to essentially extort the IRS agents. I laughed about this for weeks after. And then, 3 or so weeks later, I'll be damned if he didn't receive a letter from the IRS. Sir, we understand the point you've made. Please consider your fee waived and I hope we can put this behind us. The next one is titled, Give the Kid Whatever He Wants? Sure will do. Working at a country club, being paid almost nothing by hour but having 10% of the client's bill given to me, unless they said they weren't paying it. So despite the absurd workload, I took it. Let me say that these people were loaded, some of the wealthiest folk in the city, spending almost all day eating and drinking while their children would run around or play in the pools. Despite the money, the large majority were nice, really respectful folk, especially the older ones. One fateful sunny Saturday, this man comes with his family, let's call him Joe. Joe sits down in the same table as a lot of my regular Saturday clients were, a group of older gentlemen who ordered beer after beer, and lots of special orders from the kitchen. Me, good day sir, may I take your order? Joe, sure, bring me a brand X beer, and some ice cream for the kid. Joe's kid was a young boy around 9 called Billy, who I had seen around the club but never talked to. Joe's wife was Carmen, who just nodded to the husband request, and off I went. Over the course of the next hour or so, every time Billy saw me near him, he would just ask me for another ice cream, or a soda, etc. Due to the club's rules, I had to go directly to Joe and ask for him to authorize the boy's request. I was only doing my job, and everyone at the table knew that, using my arrival as an excuse to order more drinks. Joe, however, was getting pretty angry, and around the 8th time I arrived to talk, he grabbed me by the arm. Joe, I'm trying to have a conversation here, what's the deal now? Old man, he's just doing his job. Joe, leave the kid, me, your son wants. Joe, listen, just give him whatever he asks you to get, okay? Just don't bother me again. I look around the take, fuming as Joe let go of me, and see the old man winked at me. Cue malicious compliance. For the rest of the day, whenever the boy asked for anything, I would just give it to him and charge Joe's account. It didn't took long for Billy to realize I wasn't going to his dad, and his requests became to escalate. What started as a simple ice cream were now being portions and more portions of loaded fries, sodas, and probably more sugar than any kid should eat. It was already night when Carmen came to me, asking to close their bill. It was monstrous. Joe tried to argue with me and request for the manager, but the rest of the table reminded him of his demand to me. He was forced by the manager to pay, since there were multiple witnesses to his orders, and Carmen made him upgrade my share to 15% of their bill as an apology. Needless to say, he never treated me rudely again, and the old guys never let him forget that story. The next one is titled, Check for the TV You Want That I Know We Don't Have? Okay, I won't be right back. So this happened a few years back when I used to work at a department store in the UK. This store is very popular amongst the middle, upper class, and therefore leads to a lot of entitled and outright rude customers coming in. I should also explain that the way the break system works here is due to the lack of staff. You have to wait for the people who go before your allocated break slot to come back to work before you can go, so that there's always staff on the shop floor. This also means if you're late going to break, you can send the whole team off track for the day, causing people to have lunch breaks ages after they're meant to. So I was working in the TV department when a customer came up and asked me to check the stock on a particular model. No problem, I check the systems and see that it is showing out of stock in store and the distribution center, with it due to be coming back into stock in a couple of days' time. I explain this to the customer, who immediately goes into a tirade of entitled moaning about, this is not what I expect from department store, and if it's out of stock, why is it still on display? I explained that the store sells upwards of 50 different models of televisions, and if we had to remove each one that went out of stock, there'd be no staff left to serve anyone, which just annoyed this customer even more. Anyways, it got to the point where, despite me explaining the TV would be back in stock in 2 days and also offering viable alternative models, some better specs for less money, this customer was hell-bent on getting that particular TV today and started demanding I went to check the stock room. Surely you must have one? This is ridiculous. How can you tell you don't have any without physically checking, etc.? I can't describe to you how incredibly entitled and rude this customer was, even by the department store's usual standards, and he really started to wind me up. Now by this point, I'd been with this customer for a fairly long time, explaining I can't just magic a TV out of thin air for them, and I was already 15 minutes overdue on my lunch break. I could see my manager, who had been listening to this whole conversation, waiting to tell me to go to break, so I explained to the customer that I was going to talk to my manager and come back to him. My manager was a down-to-earth guy and a good friend of mine. I explained the customer was asking me to go check the stock room, and I knew I was already late for my 45-minute break, so together we formed a plan. I returned to the customer and explained that the stock room was on the 3rd floor of the building and contains hundreds of different TVs, which would take a while to search. The customer was adamant that I checked the stock room for his particular model, as that was the service he expected from department store, and if not, he would be complaining. With a spring in my step, I then asked the customer to wait there whilst I went up and checked if there was any in the stock room, and swiftly left the department. As pre-agreed with my manager, I then proceed to go on my 45-minute lunch break. I had a Subway, did a bit of clothes shopping, got some snacks for the team for when I went back to work, and generally took my time strolling around the town center. I then returned to work at the end of my break, go to the 3rd floor warehouse, via the stairs, not the lift, straight to the shelf where the customer's TV was meant to be, and sure enough there isn't any there. I then stroll back down 3 flights of stairs, stop for a glass of water, have a couple of chats with some colleagues, and then return to the TV department well over an hour after leaving the customer, who is still there, where I left him, looking extremely upset. I approached the customer, out of breath, and explained that I'd checked every TV in the warehouse and his one wasn't there, at which point he erupts into a rich person rage, shouting and asking to speak to a manager and saying I'd wasted his time making him wait for so long. My manager then walks over, introduces himself, and then explains he had heard the entire conversation and that I had already explained there was hundreds of TVs upstairs, meaning it would take a while. The customer looked as if he was about to explode, but realized that he had caused the wasted hour of his life, stormed out the shop, and, as far as I am aware, never did get that TV. The last one is titled, "Want me to upsell fancy coffees? I'll upsell fancy coffees until the cows come home." A long time ago I worked for a chain of posh pubs in London. The one I worked at was in Maida Vale, a fairly wealthy neighbourhood with several celebrity residents, Jude Law, for example. Anyway, I was an assistant supervisor in the pub and was always responsible for Sunday afternoon shift, which for those of you who are familiar with the UK, knows this means Sunday roast was a big deal. And we had a really good roast with all the fixins, and we'd get really busy on Sundays with all of our tables full with people who'd come to eat and drink for half a day at least. For whatever reason, my manager had decided that, despite how busy we are on Sundays, that we only needed 2 people on the shift. Again, for those of you who are familiar with UK pubs, everyone typically orders at the bar, but it's table service, so me and the other person on shift were responsible for staffing the bar, pouring drinks, taking food orders, but also taking out the food, taking out cutlery and sauces, restocking, cleaning glasses, and bussing tables. You're essentially a cashier, bartender, and wait staff all at once. And then there was the one thing I hated the most: coffees. We had this old, slow, partially broken espresso machine which none of us had been properly trained on. Making coffee on it took ages. The worst was that it would take so long that food orders would go out more slowly, and a queue would form at the bar of people wanting to order drinks. I hated having to leave customers waiting at the bar who just wanted a quick pint or soda while I fussed with the stupid coffee machine for 15 minutes. We all hated the goddamned coffee machine and complained about it constantly. Luckily, however, demand for coffee wasn't that high at the pub, given that it's traditionally a venue for drinking alcoholic beverages. But then, one day, corporate management announced that they wanted all their pubs to sell more coffee. In fact, they had quotas of coffee sales they wanted us to meet, and they wanted us to ask every guest that was placing a food order if they wanted a fancy coffee drink like we were some sort of Starbucks or something. But they still didn't give us a new, proper machine, and they still provided us with exactly zero training on making espresso drinks. For the most part, on Sundays, I ignored this edict. We were so slammed just with regular beverages and getting out Sunday roasts that adding obligatory coffees into the mix would be suicide. Then one Sunday, my manager was in the pub doing paperwork, and pulled me aside and said that he noticed our sales of coffee weren't what they should be, particularly on Sundays. He noted that Sunday afternoon should be our best day for coffee sales because everyone's in for roasts. He then perched himself next to the bar to work on his paperwork, and I could kinda tell he was doing this so he could monitor whether I was upselling coffees or not. I tried to warn him. I said, you know, with only 2 people on shift, when the rush comes we're going to be really slammed. If I'm doing coffees as well as drinks and food service, there will be a significant delay. Whatever, I'll jump on if things get out of hand, he said. So, I decided he should see how crazy Sundays get, and just what adding coffees to the mix would do. As usual on a Sunday, a trickle of people start filling into the bar around 11 a.m., but by noon it's already too deep at the bar, all the tables are full, and there are 2 full lines of food tickets with multiple plates of starters, mains, and dessert. It's now that I and the other bartender start selling the coffees hard. We're telling everyone, you know what would go well with that, a nice cappuccino, or maybe a latte. And they're all agreeing with me. I wait until I have about a dozen coffee orders all lined up, and I tell the other staff member that he's on the bar and food service, and I go over to start preparing them with our old, slow, crappy espresso machine. It's at this point that things go a bit haywire. Food starts coming down the food lift, and so the bartender is sprinting back and forth between the bar, the food lift, and the tables. The crowd at the bar is growing and becoming restless. They just want some beer, FFS. I'm going as fast as I can with the coffees, but honestly, it takes a really long time. Then my manager looks up and sees the angry mob at the bar, my colleague running around like a crazy person, and asks me, why aren't you pouring drinks? I show him my tickets, I have 20 fancy coffee orders. The manager decides to take over the coffees so I can go back to the bar, so I double down on the coffees. I'm getting people to order mochas, flat whites, I don't even know what that is, really, but now we sell them. Irish coffees, coffee with shots of Baileys or amaretto. I'm going wild. And my manager is visibly sweating and frustrated and cursing at our terrible coffee machine. And then the best thing happens. We run out of coffee cups and saucers. He's now making coffees in some styrofoam cups he found in a closet. He's very close to making a cappuccino in one of those fancy Belgian beer goblets. And then finally, he comes up to me, all angry, stop offering people fancy coffee drinks. But you said. No more coffee drinks. He never asked me to upsell coffee ever again. Thanks for listening.